It's Black History Month, and since there seems to be a concerted effort to just erase the presence of Black folks, not just in February, but all year long, it's important to share those stories they are determined to bury. So for the rest of this month, I want to share some of these stories here on Spolitics, especially those that aren't known as much. And on this episode, I want to share the story of track and field sensation Rose Robinson, who carries a very important distinction in sports history. Robinson is believed to be the first Black athlete who refused to stand for the national anthem to protest against racial injustice, which she did during the opening ceremonies of the 1959 Pan American Games. Now, before I get into what compelled Robinson to take a stand then, let me explain some of her backstory, because then you will understand why her decision to stay seated during the national anthem was completely on brand. Rose Robinson was born in 1925. She was a gifted track athlete, and her specialty was high jump. In her 20s, Robinson became deeply involved in the movement. She led a small chapter of the Congress of Racial Equality organization while she worked as a social worker at a Cleveland community center. Now, Robinson organized and led a protest against a segregated skating rink. Not only did she lead this skate-in, but she also defied the segregation rules and skated at the rink anyway. The white patrons were so angry at Robinson, they tried to trip her as she skated. And unfortunately, they were successful. Robinson suffered a broken arm. Now, while all of this was going on, Robinson still continued to show her prowess in track and field. When she returned to Chicago in the late 1950s, she was an accomplished high jumper. And in 1958, she won the high jump at the National AAU Championship, earning a spot on the U.S. women's track and field team, which was mostly Black. Now, shortly after receiving that honor, Rose was invited to compete in Russia at a State Department track event. Now, this was during the height of the Cold War, and the purpose of the event was to use Black athletes to promote America's foreign policy agenda overseas. Now, the United States government, they often use the presence of Black athletes and entertainers to shield themselves from criticism for terrorizing Black folks under Jim Crow on their own soil. Now, as you can see, the recipe for Black obedience hasn't changed, has it? But Rose Robinson wasn't having it. She told Jet magazine, "I don't want anyone to think my athletics have political connotations. In other words, I don't want to be used as a political pawn." Now, as you might imagine, that did not sit well with track officials, nor the U.S. government. A year later, after standing 10 toes down about not going to Russia, she was competing in the Pan Am Games in Chicago. And when the national anthem played during the opening ceremonies, Robinson stayed seated, as if to say, "Oh no, y'all got it." As you might imagine, Robinson was vilified. 6 months after she sat during the anthem to protest the treatment of her people, the United States government arrested her for tax evasion because she owed $386. Robinson told Jet magazine she didn't pay taxes from 1954 to 1958 because, as she put it, "I know a large part of it goes to armaments. The U.S. government is very active in atom bombs and fallout, which is destructive rather than constructive. If I pay income tax, I am participating in that destruction." Oop. Robinson was sentenced to a year and a day in jail. The day she was sentenced, authorities had to carry her out of the courtroom because she refused to walk. She literally made them carry her to jail. But Robinson wasn't done expressing her dissent. While in jail, Robinson went on a hunger strike that generated a ton of media attention, hundreds of letters of support, and even protesters who demonstrated outside the courthouse. Robinson was so frail from the hunger strike that she was force-fed intravenously. The resistance, though, it paid off. After 3 months of being on a hunger strike, she was released. Now, do y'all think she paid that $386? Here's a hint. Hell nah. Her stint in prison essentially ended her athletic career. Physically, she was unable to compete, and at that point, she had burned so many bridges in the sports world. After being released, Robinson continued, though, to resist and protest, while also creating change. Robinson linked up with a group called the Peacemakers. Her and 2 other organizers were traveling to Maryland and attempted to eat at a segregated restaurant. Robinson and her friends refused to leave. They were then arrested, but they refused to appear in court, and they refused to eat while in jail. They eventually wore the authorities down and were given $50 fines and released. Y'all know she didn't pay that $50 fine, right? But their defiance sparked a local movement to end segregation in restaurants in Maryland. And now, as you can see from Robinson's life, track and field was something she did and something she excelled at, but it did not define who she was. She used her platform as a tool And even when she no longer had track and field to amplify her message, she never abandoned what was important. Robinson died in 1976 at just 52 years old. I'm hoping she never paid the feds a dime the rest of her life. I'm Jemele Hill, and I approve this message.